There was no sex in the Soviet Union, just as there were no horror films, no extreme violence, and no sleazy B-movies. That's the fairy tale they've been selling us for decades. In reality, if you dig into the late Soviet film archives, you'll find plenty of gratuitous nudity, satanic rituals, bloody vampires, and sheer grindhouse filth that could give American drive-in movies a run for their money. Stick around until the end, because by the time we reach the top spot, you'll be wondering if censorship was completely thrown out the window. Due to YouTube's strict policies, I can't show you every uncensored frame, but trust me, there is definitely plenty to see. So pour yourself something strong, hit that subscribe button, and welcome to the dark side of Soviet cinema. Black Magic, 1990. Two curious villagers pry open an old wooden chest in a secluded attic and stumble upon a forgotten manuscript bound in leather. But reading its pages doesn't bring wealth or wisdom. It unleashes an ancient, corrupting force that transforms their quiet rural town into an open-air arena for dark spells, hypnotic trances, and midnight orgies. Released right as the Soviet Union was crumbling, Vsevolod Plotkin's Black Magic, or The Book of Ruin, threw off decades of state censorship in favor of pure, low-budget shock value. Filmmakers realized they no longer had to answer to party officials, and Plotkin took full advantage by pairing traditional Slavic folklore with heavy-handed eroticism. The film trades high-end visual effects for pure grindhouse atmosphere, shadowy woods, eerie pagan chants, and frequent, uninhibited scenes of naked cultists performing demonic rituals. It's a messy, fascinating piece of late Soviet trash cinema that proves just how fast local directors embraced absolute creative anarchy once the floodgates opened. Satanic Passions, 1990. An ambitious young man makes a dark, silent pact with forces he barely understands, trading his soul for wealth, status, and irresistible hypnotic control over women. Before long, his secluded apartment becomes a gilded trap of hallucinatory visions, seductive spells, and occult rituals, where wealthy socialites and vulnerable young women willingly strip away their sanity alongside their clothes. Directed by Viktor Vasnin under the alternative title Lyubimchik, Satanic Passions is a quintessential piece of cooperative-era Soviet trash cinema. Shot on a shoestring budget over just a few weeks, the movie completely skips complex narrative structure in favor of pure, unadulterated erotic fantasy and low-budget shock tactics. The movie leans heavily on its exploitation elements, drawn-out seduction sequences, lingering close-ups of naked witch rituals, and cheap, surreal special effects meant to mimic demonic visions. It's a fascinatingly sleazy relic of late Soviet cinema, demonstrating how quickly local independent producers rushed to exploit dark magic and explicit eroticism the moment state control dissolved. Entrance to the Labyrinth, 1989. A brilliant scientist invents a powerful, non-addictive painkiller called Medavit, only for the formula to get stolen by a ruthless criminal syndicate. Soon, the drug hits the Soviet black market, transforming underground dens into halls of hedonism, where corrupted officials, mobsters, and lured young women lose themselves in hallucinatory trips, explicit striptease, and decadent orgies. Directed by Valery Kremnev and aired as a prestige multi-part television series, Entrance to the Labyrinth managed to pull off one of the biggest exploitation tricks in Soviet history. Under the guise of a solemn, state-approved crime procedural warning citizens about the dangers of illegal drugs, the creator stuffed the screen with unprecedented levels of late 80s sleaze. Instead of keeping the scenes tasteful, the camera lingers on underground speakeasies, private adult dance shows, and provocative, lingering shots of naked women under the influence. It remains a fascinating landmark of late Soviet television, a show that technically served as a moral warning, but practically gave millions of viewers their very first look at explicit eroticism and drug exploitation on national TV. Lust of Passion, 1991. A wealthy, elegant noblewoman in pre-revolutionary Russia begins to lose her grip on reality as her darkest erotic fantasies take physical form. Stranded in a brooding mansion, she's tormented by a sinister, violent doppelganger who allures her into a web of sadomasochism, naked rituals, and bloody hallucinations from which there is no escape. Directed by Andrei Kharitonov and starring Soviet screen siren Anna Samokhina, Lust of Passion, also known as Jazda Strast, is a decadent piece of gothic psychoerotic horror based on the works of Valery Brusov. Released in 1991, the film took full advantage of the collapsing censors to deliver an atmospheric blend of high art aesthetics and uninhibited sleaze. Instead of cheap shock tactics, Kharitonov crafts a suffocating dream-like nightmare, filled with lingering nude shots, surreal psychological torment, and bloody violence framed through a lens of aristocratic decay. It's one of the most visually polished examples of late Soviet erotic horror, proving that even as the Union was falling apart, directors were eager to push sexual taboo straight into artistic obsession. Sex and Perestroika, 1990. A French film crew arrives in Moscow under the guise of filming a serious documentary about political reforms, only to spend their time hunting for underground strip clubs, illegal modeling agencies, and private bedroom encounters. What they capture on camera is a chaotic, newly liberated society where traditional morals are thrown out the window in favor of quick cash and total sexual freedom. Co-directed by François Jouffa and Francis Leroy, Sex and Perestroika is the ultimate Mondo-style Soviet exploitation picture. Shot right as the Iron Curtain disintegrated, this joint French-Soviet production was designed specifically to capitalize on Western curiosity about the sudden explosion of forbidden culture inside the USSR. The film relentlessly serves up a parade of late Soviet exploitation tropes, backstage pageants, explicit nightclub performances, nudist speeches, and candid interviews with young women embracing the erotic boom. Blurring the line between authentic documentary footage and stage sleaze, it stands as a wild, uncensored time capsule of a country shedding decades of censorship all at once. Landscape with Three Bathers, 1987. An eccentric, obsessive artist arrives at a quiet provincial resort town, determined to paint a masterpiece featuring fully nude women against the natural countryside. As he recruits and persuades local women to shed their clothing and their inhibitions for his canvas, the town's rigid, conservative atmosphere begins to fracture under the weight of suppressed desire and scandal. Directed by Valery Rubinchik, Landscape of Three Bathers stands as one of the very first Soviet films to openly use the art world as a Trojan horse for gratuitous full-frontal nudity. Released in 1987 at the dawn of Perestroika, it pushed the boundaries of what state censors would tolerate by wrapping its heavy erotic focus in the guise of high-minded artistic exploration. The film relies entirely on visual titillation, lingering on explicit nude photo shoots, bathing sequences, and candid female forms framed by lush, decaying rural scenery. It remains a historic milestone of Soviet sexploitation, a movie that used artistic expression as a thin excuse to give audience members their very first taste of uninhibited on-screen eroticism. Husband of the Baskervilles Dog, 1990. A young woman gets dragged into a ruthless criminal underworld after witnessing an underground deal gone wrong. Taken hostage in an isolated estate, she's subjected to psychological torment, forced captivity, and creepy power games played out by a ring of mobsters, corrupt elites, and an unhinged mastermind who keeps trained attack dogs for protection. Directed by Nikolai Royenko, Husband of the Baskervilles Dog is a raw, unapologetic piece of cooperative-era trash cinema. Abandoning the polished production values of classic Soviet filmmaking, the directors rushed out a sleazy, erotic thriller, heavily inspired by low-budget American B-movies and Italian giallo cinema. The plot exists purely to deliver shock tactics, lengthy, provocative bedroom scenes, lingering shots of bound and naked heroines, and sudden bursts of violent action. It's an unrefined, chaotic, and thoroughly sleazy time capsule that highlights how quickly late Soviet directors embraced explicit pulp exploitation to guarantee ticket sales. Day of Love, 1990. A ruthless criminal syndicate hatches a depraved scheme to rob a local factory's massive payroll in a gritty, industrial Soviet city. To completely paralyze the local police force, the gang orchestrates a wave of coordinated, brutal assaults across town, a bloody, lawless event they cold-bloodedly label the Day of Love. Directed by Alexander Polshikov, Day of Love is one of the most cynical and boundary-pushing crime thrillers spawned by the Perestroika era. Abandoning any lingering socialist idealism, the film dives headfirst into the grim reality of organized crime, corrupt authorities, and rampant urban decay. The movie leans heavily on shock value exploitation, packed with explicit violence, hostage situations, and lingering provocative scenes of female captivity and nudity. It's a dark, unsparing piece of late Soviet sleaze that weaponized taboo themes to keep viewers glued. 100 Days Before the Command, 1990. Deep inside a secluded military base, young recruits are subjected to a soul-crushing regime of psychological torment, hazing, and physical degradation at the hands of their senior officers. As the heat rises and sanity slips, the barracks dissolve into a surreal, hallucinatory landscape where suppressed desires and violent urges consume everyone in sight. Directed by Hussein Erkanov and based on Yuri Polyakov's controversial novella, 100 Days Before the Command took one of the Soviet military's most heavily guarded secrets, systemic hazing or dedopchina, and stripped it completely bare. State censors had shielded the Red Army's image for generations, making this film an absolute bombshell upon its release. Erkanov eschews traditional narrative in favor of pure visual exploitation, lingering, artfully framed full-frontal nudity, homoerotic subtext, and dream-like sequences of physical suffering. It stands as an audacious, visually striking piece of late Soviet cinema that turned a taboo political scandal into an explicit art house nightmare. Bloodsuckers, 1991. An aristocratic garden party at a lavish country estate slowly turns into a nightmare as guests begin to exhibit strange, predatory behavior. Behind closed doors and away from the polite chatter, noblemen and high society ladies shed their clothing and their humanity, giving in to an insatiable hunger for flesh, blood, and decadent nighttime orgies. Directed by Yevgeny Tatarsky and starring Alexander Abdulov, Bloodsuckers, also known as Pushy Krov, is the ultimate crown jewel of late Soviet sexploitation. Adapted from Alexei Tolstoy's Gothic novella The Vampire, the film took a classic piece of Russian literature and used it as a license for uninhibited costume drama sleaze. Tatarsky delivers a heady mix of gothic horror and explicit eroticism, lingering neck bites, torn dresses, aristocratic debauchery, and full-frontal nudity framed against grand imperial interiors. Released in 1991, right as the Soviet Union was collapsing, it stands as the absolute peak of late Soviet exploitation cinema, a film that fully embraced horror, sex, and dark fantasy to deliver a spectacle unlike anything seen on Soviet screens. Looking back at this era, it becomes clear that late Soviet exploitation was never just a cheap imitation of Western B-movies. It was a chaotic, unpredictable explosion of creativity triggered by 50 years of suppressed art, taboo themes, and strict state censorship, suddenly evaporating overnight. Honestly, putting this video together was a nightmare of its own. Tracking down raw footage for these films was insanely tough. Most of them exist only on degraded VHS rips or forgotten regional archives. And to be completely real with you, editing and censoring some of these scenes for YouTube was genuinely uncomfortable. The sheer, unhinged filth unfolding on screen made me question what on earth these directors were thinking. While some of these movies pushed boundaries purely for cheap shock value, others capture the very real, unfiltered atmosphere of a society on the brink of collapse.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the weirdest and darkest corners of movie history, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which of these lost gems caught your attention. Don't forget to subscribe for more retrospective journeys into obscure cinema, and I'll see you in the next archive.